Alright guys, TechGrab here today. I'd like to talk about substitutes because I did a video a couple of days ago talking about the top 5 players outside the league, but whether they will transfer to the actual substitutes we will see in the league is definitely another story, and it most likely won't for a number of reasons that I want to go through today, and I'd be really interested to hear your guys' opinions as always on which substitutes do you think are going to go to the professional teams. So I'll go through the actual rules in the handbook if you guys aren't fully aware of them yet, and I'll mention some potential names thrown around here or there, but mainly like the theories behind what players should go to what teams, etc, etc. Also, I believe OpTic were talking on stream the other day about how they apparently have a player, like they've got the contract sorted, supposedly an SMG, so we're not really sure who that is quite yet. Of course, if you guys have any thoughts, predictions, anything like that, the comment section below is your best friend. So let's go through the rules for this season, because we've never seen any substitute situations before in previous titles, but they're moving towards this franchising system. Every time I say this, I say that I'll do a video on franchising at some point, so I definitely will. I'm trying to learn some more things, get some things sorted, and hopefully I'll get something out in the next couple of weeks to try and explain the situation and what it should be looking like going forwards. And then I'm sure as we get more and more stories adapting, I can adapt the video as the time comes towards when that is seeming more and more likely. But regardless here, so substitute roster. There's 5 men on the normal team, men or women. The substitute roster consists of and is limited to 1 player. Teams are required to maintain a substitute roster. So there's 16 teams in the Pro League. You can find those names right here. OpTic, eUnited, Splyce, LG, E6, Reciprocity, Envy, Heretics, Midnight, 100T, UIU, Evil Geniuses, Accelerate, Team Spacey, Red Reserve, and Overtime, of course. Each of those teams has to have 1 substitute on their roster, and these are the rules around it. So the player on the substitute roster may be used in any regular season match, Pro League Cup, or Championship event. Pro League Cup, I'm guessing maybe is Pro League Challenge, what they had before. I'm not exactly sure what that is, but regardless, so long as their roster submission rules are adhered to, teams are only permitted to change their substitute roster so long as no applicable roster deadlines are violated. And yeah, this is another interesting bit. So players on the substitute roster are permitted to participate in the amateur circuit. So the way that open events work this year is that the pools are exclusively occupied by Pro League teams, and anyone else outside the Pro League has to compete in the amateur section of the tournament to win their own trophy, win their own prize pool, and place a maximum of top 17 at the event. So that's basically the amateur circuit, I guess you can say. However, if a player on the substitute roster participates in any regular season match, Pro League Cup or Championship event, they are prohibited from competing in the amateur circuit for a period of 1 week, and are also prohibited from entering the next chronologically subsequent 2000 series tournament, regardless of length of time elapsed. So yeah, 2000 tournament, and there's national qualifiers for the international tournaments. That's all kind of part of the amateur circuit. If you're not in the league, you're in the amateur circuit, so that's effectively how it works. Now, one also crucial thing to mention is teams are only permitted to make a substitute request for an entire week of regular season play, unless otherwise explicitly permitted by the administration. Teams will not be permitted to field a substitute from match to match. So if you're a team like 100 Thieves, you're not feeling too confident about your roster, but you have like a guy like Decimate as your substitute, you can't just say, okay, Kenny or whoever the hell, take us back seat, we're getting Decimate in, and we're just going to use him as our like permanent substitute and effectively cheat your way to an earlier roster change than you're allowed to when the first roster change period is on March the 1st. So let's go through some of the names of players that didn't make the league. I did go through my top 5 the other day. I mentioned Dylan, I mentioned Decimate, I mentioned Lacefield, Parasite, of course, Celium, Priester, especially Zuma, all these kind of players. GodRx is definitely one. It looks like Ricky has gone to a coaching role on LG as of the present time, so that's what I'm assuming for them. You also have guys like Saints. These are all the players that didn't make the Pro League. It's pretty remarkable, and we'll go through some stats here actually just in a second. So these stats were just revealed. I think 86% of the maps were extracted. The data was extracted from by JP and Doug and those guys that do the work on CoD stats. So I'll link all this down in the description box below. Fantastic work as always. They've done their very best to get all the stats to us in a difficult situation, and blimey, the top of this list is crazy. Adjusted KD, just to make you guys aware, is like normal KD just takes into account all your kills or your deaths, but adjusted KD gives a multiplier to your control kills deaths and your S&D kills deaths to make them all equivalent to hardpoint, because you generally get less kills in control and S&D than you do in hardpoint, of course, so it kind of marries it out. Basically, if you're a really good S&D player, then your adjusted KD will be higher than your KD. So, an interesting one indeed. Scrapsy G somehow has a 1.43 over 36 maps, 1.39 overall KD, mental stuff. This is really the more intriguing side of things. Top 10 overall adjusted KDs from players who didn't qualify. Credit to Intel Call of Duty for putting this all together. Robbie Beeman has a 1.29. He was on that Nation of Power team, I think. They didn't really do too much. They didn't even win a series, I think, but he was doing well. Also, you do have to keep into account the amount of maps these guys played. So, when you take into account the stats, Lacefield 1.28, Decimate 1.22, Dylan CoD 1.17, Parasite, Celium, Hawkeye actually surprisingly good on Imperial, and Luca as well, a big talent from this event. And when you look at the maps they played as well, like Celium, 37 maps, Lacefield, Decimate, 38 apiece, Dylan 29, Luca 41. So that's a pretty big deal. And these players, in addition to, I would suggest, Priester and, Zuma and other big names, these players are really, you could say, like the best of the rest that didn't go in the league. In terms of KD, of course, doesn't mean everything. But would you expect these players to be the ones getting picked up onto a top team as a substitute? Now, there was a few reasons why I don't think that's the case. First of all, you have the reputation situation. Someone like Zuma, someone like Attach, someone like Priester, I guess. They've been around the scene for years, maybe not Priester so much, but they've been playing with pros all the time, highly regarded in the community. These guys are going to have a much better chance of a pro team looking at them and, the players on the team deciding, okay, that's the guy we want in as our substitute, even if they haven't been performing as well as some of these guys. Another big thing to consider, and I do want to touch more on this later when I talk about the amateur scene, especially within European and, Australian Call of Duty as a whole, which is a big concern for me right now because, okay, say you're a team like Reciprocity, you're a team like Red Reserve. You've got European players, but it's much easier and cheaper logistically to get a talent, a substitute from the American region. You get any of these guys, maybe you can get a guy like Asim or something from FaZe Black. You could get a Saint, I don't know, whatever you're feeling. But what's unlikely, I would suggest, is that they get a guy like Dylan CoD, they get a guy like Luca from abroad, because you've then got to house that guy, you've got to pay for his flights, he's got to completely change his lifestyle, come across to the States, just to be a substitute and probably not play in any matches, because the chances you're going to need a substitute are pretty low anyway, but it's maybe setting up for systems in future years where, like you can in Overwatch, where you can just switch out players mid-series, maybe you even have multiple substitutes on a team. I don't know where it's going to go, but it definitely favours the North American talent in this regard. And if you're a guy like if you're a team like Reciprocity, you're not going to pay a hell of a lot of money to go and house someone from Europe and pay for all the transaction costs required to get them over in the States, when you can just get a local player that's probably not going to play anyway. And if you need him, he can just fly down or drive down to Columbus or whatever would be required for that week of play or something along those lines. So that's definitely what's likely to happen. I do think Lacefield and Decimate should be hot property. Also, another little bit of intel we saw here from Intel Call of Duty again, that Blast to UYU potentially is on the cards. They began following each other on Twitter here. You can see that Blast followed UYU and then they also followed him back. So, an interesting turn of events. Maybe he is a potential target for their substitute in the league. And then we have some other things to consider as well. If you were one of these players, do you want to be a substitute, or would you prefer to bide your chances and try and get onto an actual team? And the other way round, if you are a team, how good a player do you want your substitute to be? This is kind of what I'm thinking. If you're a team like 100 Thieves right now, do you want to get, because it's the players that get to decide the substitute after all, it's not the manager or whoever. The players get to decide the substitute. If I'm a guy like, I don't know, say Red Reserve, I'm a guy like Bantz, I don't know. You've had a really tough event. He actually had like a 0.78 adjusted KD at this event, which is the lowest ever. Okay, stats don't mean everything, but then again, he maybe thinks his spot is potentially under threat, and if anyone's going to leave the team, it will probably be him. If they had to drop someone overnight, it was going back to 4v4. Bantz would be the guy they get rid of, I can almost guarantee that. So he may think that his spot is potentially under threat. Would he be super keen to get a guy like Decimate coming into his team? He's thinking, my spot's potentially on the ropes. Now there's this substitute lurking behind me who has had a really good PLQ in Vegas. I feel like my spot's kind of under threat. So if I'm one of these top teams, I'm not so sure if I'm a player on the team, and maybe I've been struggling a little bit, that I'll be potentially endorsing a substitute to come onto the team, which they could realise through practice or whatever, that I'm going to get replaced by that player. So from an organisation standpoint, do I think, okay, I'll get a really good substitute so then maybe we can swap him out? Or do I say, we'll wait around a bit. If we need a change, we'll just get a lower tier substitute that we probably won't need anyway, which is really cheap to acquire or whatever, get some sort of contract going at the last minute. And then if I really need a change, I can just get a substitute from some other team or another player that maybe has decided they don't want to be a substitute because they don't want to get locked in a contract that could potentially, ruin their chances of getting in a really good team. Like, say you're a guy like Decimate, and the only team that wants you to offer, the only team that wants to offer you a substitute position is something like Accelerate or, a lower tier team like that, because the top teams, maybe they don't want you because they fear that their spots may be under threat. So, if you get an offer on Accelerate, do you even want to join them? Because then potentially you get an offer, you get a situation where you're tied up to a contract, and when a really top team wants you on March the 1st in a roster change period, they now have to negotiate you out of that contract. Maybe there's buyout situations, and you're actually going to be a cheaper and more attractive option if you are not a substitute after all. So I think it's a really intriguing situation right now. I don't think I mentioned when the substitute lock is yet, but supposedly it's going to be in, a day or two, if not tomorrow, because the organisation lock is supposedly tomorrow on Monday, and I'm guessing the substitute lock is at the same time because we haven't heard anything different, and I think that's what a couple of the pros were saying on Twitter, but I couldn't find their tweets before I was going to make this video, so I'd be interested to hear your thoughts on it. I think that mostly the talent is going to get picked up is going to be from the States, unless one of these guys, Reciprocity, Red Reserve, or, maybe overtime, they think that a French guy from home, like a guy like Atlas, I don't know, might need to substitute in, that they've played with at Vegas, they might want to get him over, if they have the money to do so. Supposedly overtime are going to get bought out by Denial, so we'll have to see how that goes in the coming days. I'll make a video on whatever organisation and substitute situations happen. One quick thing to say on Simp is that Simp is 18 on February the 6th, which puts him after the period to be a substitute. So I don't think Simp will be able to be a substitute just yet, but he will be available for roster changes come March the 1st. I'll be interested to hear your thoughts on this. Who knows who's going to what team right now? I don't really keep up too much with the individual teams to see who they play with behind the scenes to decide who they would get. One thing to note is that Parasite, I think he would struggle to get a position as a substitute on a team, but Adam Apicella did say to him the other day that, you can be a coach and a substitute. If you decide to coach one of these teams, say you get an offer to coach one of these top teams, you can also be their substitute. So maybe that's one of these, what one of these teams is thinking. If you don't have too much money, you can have a coach and also have a substitute be one and the same player. A team like Evil Geniuses, I'm probably not going to need a substitute anyway. It's going to cost me too much money. Revan, get on the substitute roster, and for whatever reason we need a substitute player, Revan can just hop in there. He's the coach, he understands the team anyway, and that's maybe a situation that these guys will consider. So maybe we won't see as many substitutes picked up as one would predict going into things. So anyway, those are just some thoughts. If you guys have any thoughts on specific players that you would expect to see go onto some of these teams, example Heretics or something like that, like who do they get from back home? Maybe they get a Toho or some Spanish player from back home. There probably would be likely because you need someone who's going to speak Spanish, right? So that's maybe an option that you will see some players come out from Europe. But in terms of top names and big talent, probably going to be majority from the States, and whether we will see some really spectacular players like a Decimate, like a Lacefield that have been super good at Vegas and the Pro League qualifier, whether we'll see them decide to hang back from being a substitute on a professional team, or maybe not even get chosen for fear that they would overtake one of the spots in a very good team. Maybe they'll hang back and potentially get an opportunity where they will have no contract to be bought out of further down the line. So I hope you guys enjoyed. Hopefully I brought some things to mind that maybe you guys hadn't considered. Be interested to hear your thoughts on it in the comment section below as always. Like if you enjoy, subscribe if you're new. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.
Yeah, I know. 7 standing in the worst corner in the game. Here we go, Robert. Oh, the jukes! Oh my god! Oh my god!
Mark it up, boys, mark it up, mark it up. Chat it up, chat it up, chat it up, boys.
Oh my god, turn up, Rob. 1v3. Can he suck some dick in the alleyway? Oh my god, he gives him the schlong dong.